Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures, Daily Dose of Nature, India Safari Photography 2.0 Pro Tips, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Aditya Panda. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Over to you, Aditya.
Thank you, Rob. Hello, everyone. My last photography webinar was aimed at beginners and amateur photographers who come on safari to India and would like to do a good job of preserving their memories here and taking them back. Today's webinar is aimed at more serious photographers, and pro photographers, experienced photographers. I have been leading natural habitat adventure expeditions in India since 2016, and we have photo expeditions, of course, and starting 2022, we'll be operating 2 new Photo Pro expeditions in India that I'll tell you about at the end of the webinar. Now, while it requires landscapes across countries, across different kinds of habitats, there still are certain specific conditions where you need to keep some extra things in mind, and safari photography is one such situation where it helps to keep a few things in mind before heading out on one. Now, shooting conditions on safari can be very different from, say, hiking somewhere on foot and photographing birds or photographing other wildlife in that area, or say shooting from a boat. The majority of photography on safari in places like India or Africa, especially India, is confined to a vehicle. So you'll be doing most of your safari photography from the confines of a Jeep. That adds some extra challenges to the amount of flexibility that you can enjoy while shooting Indian wildlife. And of course, there are other factors like weather and dust and things such as that you need to keep in mind while being on safari in a place like India. Also, unlike the African savanna, for example, wildlife in India is found mostly in dry and moist deciduous forest, at least the areas that we visit to, and this poses additional challenges in how we find our animals and what conditions we watch and photograph them under. Now, before we get to the pro tips that frankly work for me, these are tips that I personally put to use, and I'll be sharing with you on this webinar. Before we get there, let's have a quick discussion about the kind of gear that you should carry on safari in India. So, since we'll be shooting a range of animals, from large mammals like tigers and elephant to a lot of birds, and while we do the majority of our photography from a safari vehicle out in the wilderness, there are also plenty of opportunities for street and landscape photography. So in my opinion, the ideal gear for a trip like this would involve at least 2 DSLR or mirrorless camera body. A lot of people are switching to mirrorless now, especially people who want to do a lot of video, and it's entirely up to you as to which system you're comfortable with, DSLRs or mirrorless. And the reason I'm suggesting for 2 bodies is so that you have 2 different lenses mounted on each, so that you do not have to change lenses in the dusty and bumpy conditions of safari. And of course, animals move quickly, so you might not even have the time to change lenses. And it always helps to have two different sets of focal lengths always at the ready to compose and shoot your pictures. So I would recommend a fast short to medium telephoto lens, like your typical 70 to 200 2.8, which is a fantastic lens for large mammals, especially when they're nice and close. And on the other body, I'd recommend stabilized long prime lens, a long telephoto lens like a 400 2.8, which is my dream lens, or a 500 f4 or a 600 f4. Nothing longer, of course, because stabilization is an issue in safari vehicles, which I'll talk about later. Alternatively, you could also use some fantastic lenses that I personally think are perfect for safari, zoom lenses, like the Canon 100 to 400 or the Nikon 200 to 500 5.6, which I use and which I find to be the most versatile lens while on safari. It can be handheld very easily, and it covers a very sweet focal length range that helps you get close enough to faraway subjects and yet be able to handle large mammals when they come closer. See, for the longest time, I used to shoot with the 300 f4 prime, and it was a brilliant workhorse. I used it for many years. The problem with that used to be that a lot of times with larger animals, especially elephant, the animal would be way too close sometimes. And after that, I underwent a system change. I used to shoot Pentax. I moved to Nikon, and now I sort of downgraded to a zoom lens. But I think the Nikon 200 500 5.6, which I use now, is the perfect lens for safari. So besides your long telephoto and medium telephoto, you need at least at least one wide to standard focal length zoom lens that you can use for landscapes and for street photography, portraits maybe, and of course filters of your choice, teleconverters if you like using them. But do ensure you carry extra batteries and extra memory cards, and have at least two backup hard drives. Obviously, nowadays everybody prefers to use the SSD or solid state drive hard drives, because these are more reliable, and in all the bumping around, moving around, shake that travel involves, these hard drives they can withstand all that pretty well. I usually recommend against carrying a tripod while on safari, because in most situations you cannot use one, because using it inside a safari vehicle is quite pointless, because the vehicle itself isn't 100% stable. So any movement in the vehicle will get transferred to the tripod and to your camera. So I always prefer using a bean bag, because that gives me a lot of flexibility. I can move around in the vehicle, place it wherever it best serves my purpose, and shoot with that. And when we have to move from one park to another, or pack for a flight, bean bag can just be emptied where you are, and it's so easy to pack and then refill it again with rice or some other grain at your next safari lodge. A monopod might be useful, although I personally do not use one. If you enjoy using a monopod and are comfortable with it, I think that's pretty useful in a safari kind of scenario. And of course, do not forget binoculars, and ideally carry your gear in a soft-sided backpack style of camera bag that is easier to fly with. and easier to put in, use it as carry-on on aircraft, because on some of our trips we do a lot of flying between parks. Now, sometimes the excitement of a trip probably falls short of the excitement that comes with the anticipation of a trip and preparing for a trip. So you can use that to ensure that your gear is in perfect working order by starting to check your gear at least 2 weeks in advance of your trip. That will give you enough time to repair or replace anything that isn't working properly. And this is especially important if you do not shoot very regularly and your gear stays packed and is only pulled out when you go out on a trip like this. Test all your gear by doing some test shoots in your neighborhood, at home, wherever. And it's very important to check your batteries. Batteries can deteriorate with storage and with age. So at least 2 weeks in advance of your trip, get your batteries out, charge them overnight. Make sure that when you put your battery in the charger, the charging light comes on, and that the battery charges up in the amount of time that it should charge up. And then put it back in your camera and ensure that the camera shows full battery. And then try shooting a few hundred shots with it and make sure that the battery isn't draining faster than it is supposed to. Memory cards, again, can fail you at the most opportune moments. So make sure that your cards are working fine, that when you plug it into your laptop or your computer, that it is detecting it fine, and that you can find everything on it, that it's not corrupt. And do empty your cards and format it, shoot, test, format again, and then be sure that it's ready for field action. Image stabilization on lenses can sometimes also malfunction. So make sure to turn your lens IS or VR or whatever it is called in the brand of camera that you use is working, and put your camera to your eyes, especially with optical image stabilized lenses, and make sure that the amount of stabilization that's supposed to be there is there and it's working fine. And similarly with zoom lenses, do check them. Say if you've got a 200 to 500 like I do, take it out, mount it on the camera, shoot at 200 millimeters, shoot at 300 millimeters, then at 400 and 500. Test it. Test that the autofocus works fine, that the camera is nailing focus like it's supposed to, and that everything is working fine. I usually recommend that you carry 2 backup hard drives, because these pictures that you get on these trips are priceless, and you can never get them back if, in case you have a hard drive that acts up or gets corrupted. One setting that I always go into the menu and set every time I get a new camera is to disable shutter release without a memory card. I've had too many situations where I have happily shot off hundreds of frames of what I thought were beautiful pictures, only to find that I had forgotten to put a card in the camera. And just to make sure that you do not do the same mistake, ensure that this setting is turned off in your camera. It can be turned off on every DSLR and mirrorless camera that I know of. And of course, if you're carrying your laptop with you to help you back up your images every day after coming back from safari, ensure that there's plenty of space on your laptop and that it has enough RAM to be able to handle all your large files, and that everything works perfectly. And of course, a very crucial piece of equipment that you need to ensure is in your camera bag is the appropriate power adapter for the country that you're traveling to. Now, those were checks that you need to do well in advance of your trip. While on your trip, and indeed, even while out on game drives and in the middle of shooting, there are certain settings that it helps to keep an eye on. You see, in a safari jeep situation, if your camera is lying next to you and things are moving, it's very likely that a dial might get turned by mistake, or a switch might get moved away from position, and that could end up messing crucial settings. So always keep an eye on your shutter speed, aperture, ISO, your exposure compensation. Make sure that your autofocus is set to AF continuous, because you'll be tracking moving subjects, and that your burst mode is at its highest setting so that you do not lose any crucial frames. And of course, the metering mode of your choice is set. I personally prefer spot metering because that works best with wildlife. And of course, your battery and card levels, memory card levels, keep an eye on that. Now, a lot of times in our tendency to try and get the cleanest image possible, we try to shoot with as low an ISO as we can. I'd advise that with wildlife, err on the side of noise. So focus first on getting the image, get the shot first, and then once you're sure that you've got a few keepers, and if the animal is still there and is cooperating, then you can check your ideal settings and get your shutter speed down, and then your ISO down, and get those beautiful clean images. And that brings me to the subject of progressive ISO reduction, which is something that I always try and do. When an animal appears on the scene, especially an animal that I'm not sure whether it'll be there for long enough or not, I start shooting at a high ISO, because most of my shooting situations are handheld and in a moving vehicle and with fast moving animals. So and especially early in the morning or late in the afternoon when the light is down, start by getting your safety shots first at a higher ISO, and after you've got a few keepers, then you can begin to progressively say you start at ISO 6400 to ensure that you get the shot. And after you've taken a few shots at that ISO, try and reduce it down to 3200 or 1600, and then 1800, and all the way down till you have the slowest shutter speed that you can use. And that way you'll ensure that you first have some keepers, and by the end of your shots, if the animal cooperates, you might get some fantastic images at very low ISOs that will become stunning and worth printing very large. This picture of these two swamp deer stags is something that I shot in that manner, and in the end I ended up getting this particular picture at ISO 80, which is fabulous. But had I started shooting at ISO 80, I'm not sure whether I would have had enough shutter speed to handle the shake in my arms or the movement in the animals. Now, in situations where it's difficult to get high shutter speeds, use the continuous burst mode to its absolute best use. I have managed to pull off some very good keepers at impossibly slow shutter speeds simply by using the burst mode to its full potential. If you say are in a situation where you cannot shoot at shutter speeds higher than say 1/60th of a second or 1/100th of a second, just aim and shoot, because there's every likelihood that in 10 or 20 or 30 shots there might be 2 or 3 keepers that come out really sharp. Having said that, I'll say fire economically, because you don't want to fill out your buffer, your camera buffer very quickly. Otherwise, if you just fire recklessly away at the right moment when the best action is happening, your camera's buffer might be full and you might be shooting, when you press the shutter, it might shoot maybe 1 frame a second or something. So don't do that. This, by the way, is an Irrawaddy dolphin. It's not an animal you're likely to see on safari in India, but I just use this picture as an example of always having enough burst, enough frames at your disposal to shoot when a rare animal makes a quick appearance. Stabilization is key, of course. And as I was mentioning earlier, beanbags work better than tripods, and in my opinion, even monopods. Make sure your lens stabilization is turned on into the appropriate settings that you prefer, and make full use of the bars and everything on the vehicle that you can find to get some extra support. Make sure that your focus point is set on the frame where you want it. And the worst thing is to compose a beautiful frame only to find that your focus point is somewhere where you do not want it. It's crucial to have it on the eye of the animal. Now, a lot of photographers prefer to use the back button AF mode, where you disable autofocus from your shutter release button and just use the back button autofocus button to autofocus. Now, this is very useful in acquiring focus and then recomposing and shooting. So when you acquire focus, say with your center focus point or wherever else the focus point might be on your screen at that point of time, you acquire it with the back button autofocus, and then you let go of the button so that the focus stays where you want it, and then you reframe your picture and shoot with the shutter release button. Now, if you do not disable autofocus with the shutter release button, what it's going to do is that the moment you press the button again, the lens is going to focus somewhere else and not on the subject where you had framed it. One of the commonest mistakes that I see a lot of photographers make, and something that I myself am guilty of, is that in our excitement to get the shot, we often shoot down at animals while on safari. While you're on safari, you're on a higher platform in a vehicle and the animal is likely to be lower. And nothing makes as much difference to the composition of a wildlife photograph than getting down to eye level with an animal, because then you really, the picture really engages with you. You are viewing the animal at its eye level, and that really makes for striking compositions. So in a safari vehicle, a lot of people tend to stand up and start shooting. Now that makes the animal sort of look dwarfed in the frame, and it doesn't give a very pleasant sort of composition. So try and get as low as possible on our photo expeditions and photo pro expeditions in India. It's very easy to do that, or I'd say relatively easy to do that, because each of you has an entire row in the Jeep to yourself. So plenty of space for your gear, and plenty of space to try all kinds of positions, lying down, crouching between the seats, and holding your camera down with your LCD screen popped up to help you get these amazing perspectives. Now, this would have been a very boring picture had I shot it, from a height. Fortunately, the tiger itself was slightly higher than the road, and crouching down a little bit, I managed to get the frame at eye level with the tiger. Now, with larger creatures, especially tigers, elephants, rhino, creatures that are grand, that are majestic, you can use your composition to sort of enhance that grandness about them by going below eye level. It makes the animal lord over the frame, and wherever you get the opportunity to do that, try and do that, because it's going to make every animal look even more majestic. Here's a sloth bear in the rain. Now, there is another tendency that we have as photographers, which is to try and get very tight shots of the faces of animals, very tight portraits. I mean, we all carry long lenses, and our tendency, especially with zoom lenses with wildlife photography, is to zoom in as much as possible, try and get as close as possible. But that sort of makes pictures very monotonous. Everybody shoots tight portraits of animals, and if you want to stand out, and if you want to tell a story with your images, I like this rule that's called pi. So with every species, if not every individual, because it might not be possible in the case of every individual, but with every species, try and get at least these three perspectives: portrait, interaction, and the species in its environment. So pi is an easy sort of acronym to try and remember that way. Eye contact is everything in wildlife photography most of the time. As it is often said, if the eyes of an animal are in focus, the rest of the animal is in focus enough. So eye contact is crucial to make your subject engage with the viewer, and Catchlight plays a very important role in this. Now, this picture of a tiger behind some thick vegetation would have been very ordinary had the eyes not been in focus, and if there was no Catchlight, it wouldn't have been just ordinary. It would have been outright, garbage material that I'd have deleted. But here you see very little of the tiger, but those eyes are engaging so incredibly that it really makes the picture sort of stand out. And the Catchlight in the eye really sort of makes them pop, and gives them that extra punch. Also, try not to focus only on the animal's face or the animal's entire body. Try and pick out interesting bits of their anatomy. A lot of animals have some very beautiful, very interesting body parts that, seen in isolation, can look very interesting. I found the paws of this tigress that was lying next to a pool, quite interesting, and I composed this image. The eyes of animals like elephants and rhino, can look quite dramatic in close compositions, because these pachyderms have this very nicely sort of wrinkled skin that adds a lot of mood and drama to these pictures. And cropped in close, or zoomed in close, the tusk of an elephant or the eye of a rhino or an elephant can make for some very nice pictures. The langur monkey is one of the commonest animals that you'll see while out on safari in India. So common that a lot of people do not even bother to take pictures of them beyond the simple record shot right at the beginning of their trips. But if you spend time with them, not only are they very interesting animals, they are extremely photogenic. And here I just found this langur, its hands and feet to make a very beautiful, very interesting scene. Now, it is very easy to get distracted by the excitement of having found an animal, and we tend to, forget the background and the foreground of that scene when we start shooting. Now, in a situation like this, I resisted the temptation to zoom in and get a close-up of these elephants. This beautiful herd of elephants walked in out of the sunset to this pond in Kaziranga National Park, and with the beautiful red silk cotton trees that you see in the background and the golden light, it made an incredible frame. And I decided to zoom out and compose the frame in such a way that the landscape was as much a part of the image as the subjects. And I just love how the landscape dwarfs these giants, this beautiful herd of elephant as they come down for a drink. Equally important to watch your foreground, especially with an animal being behind dense cover. It can be difficult to nail focus. So you might have to do a little bit of manual overdrive in situations like these. And it's important to watch out for things like this twig here. Had my camera been half an inch higher, this twig would have come in front of this tiger's eye in the picture, and it would have been a completely unusable picture. So keep an eye on the foreground as well. And if you want really high quality images with the with minimum noise, try and make a habit of exposing to the right. Obviously, you should always keep an eye on your histogram when you're shooting to ensure that you're not clipping any shadows or highlights. The thing with pictures is that with digital photographs is that when you process them in post, and a picture is slightly underexposed or exposed to the left, and you try to pull out the shadows in post, that is going to give you a lot of noise. The way to address that is to expose to the right, and then manage the highlights later on post, and that will give you far more pleasant results. And how do you expose to the right? You have to overexpose your picture, but don't do that by bumping up the ISO. Do that using the aperture and shutter speed to the extent possible, and try and keep your histogram to the right. Tracking in advance is also very important. Animals move quickly. They might not be in an ideal spot for long. So, when you have an animal coming out, say you are watching a tiger walking through cover, and you have identified a spot where you want it, or where you predict it might pass through, where you would want to take a photograph of it, or even while you are tracking it through your viewfinder, just waiting for a nice clean spot to quickly take a picture. It's important to begin tracking the animal in your focus point well in advance, so that it is absolutely sharp and in focus at the very moment that you release your shutter. And equally important, don't ignore the smaller animals, the less glamorous stuff, because in our chase of big cats and other charismatic large fauna, we miss out on tremendous photographic opportunities that come our way. Always try and make best use of these opportunities. And in fact, I'd even suggest that if you've had enough good shots of your charismatic large mammals, specifically make time in your safari, in your game drives, to focus on the equally interesting smaller animals, because otherwise you might come to India on safari, have fantastic pictures of tigers and elephant, and then go back home and realize that all those langur monkeys, or the beautiful spotted deer, or the jackal or jungle cat that you saw are not there in your hard drive, because you've been so focused on shooting all the big stuff. And while on safari, or for that matter in any wildlife photography situation, the one thing that is not in control, one of the many things that is not in our control, is the light. As wildlife photographers, I think 99% of the time we use and work with natural light. So whatever light situation there is, I think it is important to use it to our advantage. Every kind of light situation can be used to one's advantage. Of course, there's beautiful golden light like this, where you can make amazing silhouettes and some very moody images. And of course, in nice bright light with the sun behind you, you will get fantastic images of an animal with all its colors and blue sky and all of that coming out. But even if it is overcast, even if it is cloudy, fret not, because those muted colors that come out in that kind of weather are fantastic for photography. There are no harsh shadows, there are no blown highlights, so you'll use those opportunities. Cameras these days have amazing high ISO performance, so we no longer have to stop shooting if there isn't enough light, if it is too cloudy or too dark. This situation here, I think this was extremely overcast and in fact raining, and we had a jackal in Kanha National Park that was looking very wet and miserable, and then it stopped and posed for us in this beautiful meadow. And I think there's far more mood and far more it's a far more interesting frame than it would be if it was just another regular bright sunny day and it was just another regular jackal standing in a meadow. So that's it for now. And if you have any suggestions, if you agree, disagree, or with anything that I have said, I would love it if you would put those in your questions field. And I would also love it if you would want to suggest any particular topics that you would want me to do future webinars on. These could be wildlife topics and also photography topics. And with that, I'd like to end this webinar. But before we move on to the Q&A section, I would like to remind you all that India is now open, and that we have some fantastic PhotoPro departures that have been announced for India. In particular, the India Tiger Safari, a PhotoPro expedition, and the Snow Leopard Quest PhotoPro expeditions that will start operating in 2022. So if you're interested in those trips or any other expeditions in India, please get in touch with NatHab on the website, phone number, and email ID given below. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Aditya. Now, before we start the question and answer session, I'd like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the question field in your control panel. With that, let's get started with some of the questions. Now, one of the challenges, of course, with carrying all the photo gear is how much clothing and other miscellaneous stuff you need to carry. Do you have a recommendation on what the minimum amount of clothing you would need on trips like this?
Well, our pre-departure briefing booklets go into meticulous detail in listing these out. I would say, depending upon the season you're traveling in, say if it's a summer trip, say if it's the India Tiger Quest or India Tiger Safari expedition, that operates between April and June, so you don't have to carry any warm clothes. You can just carry a couple of pairs of shirts and a couple of pairs of trousers, and we have excellent laundry service at all the lodges that we stay at, so you don't need to carry all that much gear. In the Grand India Wildlife Expedition, Wildlife Adventure, which is a 2-week-long expedition, you might want to carry more clothes, and also because that operates in the winter, you will need to carry a fleece and a layer or two to go over that. And so, usually all your clothes will easily fit into a single duffel bag if you pack accordingly. And when I go on these trips, I have one duffel bag and one camera bag, and that's all. I check the duffel bag into the aircraft and carry the camera bag in the cabin.
Great, thanks for that. Now let me ask you, do you need to bring a laptop? And if you do, are you going to need more than that, or should you bring a couple of different hard drives?
Well, that depends. If you have that really depends on your shooting style and what you're comfortable with. So if you carry large enough memory cards, say 64 GB, 128 GB, and multiple memory cards, then you probably don't need a laptop. Also, people have different shooting styles, and some people shoot very economically, and they can make a GB last really long. But it's convenient to have some sort of device to be able to back up your images, download them after every game drive, or at least at the end of every day, so that the next day you have a fresh empty card to fill out with all kinds of wildlife action that you might see the next day. But it really is a personal choice, I'd say, depending upon what you're most comfortable with.
Great, good advice. Let's talk about bean bags for a second. Should we bring our own? Is there a particular size, or does Nat have them in the Jeeps?
We do have them in the Jeeps. The lodges all have them in the Jeeps, but excuse me. Depending on the size of your lens, and depending upon what you're comfortable working with, you might not always get, say, the molar bean bags that that most people like. Sometimes there might be smaller bean bags that you might not feel comfortable with. Every Jeep has bean bags on our game drives, but if you have a favorite bean bag that you use regularly, I think it's an easy piece of equipment to carry, because you can always empty it at home, fold it up like a piece of cloth that it is, and then once you land here at the lodge, they'll be very happy to fill it up with rice or something of that sort to help you.
That's great to know. You don't want to add that much extra weight when you're flying, that's for sure. Can you you mentioned a Canon lens at the beginning. Can you repeat what the name of that was again for us?
I mentioned the Canon 100 to 400 and the Nikon or the Nikkor 200 to 500. The Nikkor 200 to 500 is the one that I said that I use, And both these lenses are, I think, perfect fits for safari because they cover the most used focal lengths, while out in safari. So, for somebody starting out, for somebody wanting to buy their first lens for safari or for wildlife photography, I think these are some really good lenses.
Great, thank you. So, do you have any advice for how to shoot through a window?
Well, our Jeeps are open, so you don't have to shoot through a window. There are bars on the sides that you can use to put your beanbag on, or the seat armrests. Most of the shooting will usually be handheld, and you can always put a beanbag on the roll bar, or other bars on the vehicle to give you some extra stability.
Excellent. So, what do you think the auto ISO is most useful for shooting? What situations?
Well, again, auto ISO is something that I used to use earlier. Now I've switched back to sort of controlling the ISO myself. But if you would prefer an auto ISO range, it really depends on the camera that you're using. Some cameras can shoot excellent pictures, very clean pictures, all the way to 12,800. But what I usually do on Safari is I leave the auto ISO range between 400 to 6400, so that at all times the camera is choosing a fast enough shutter speed. Usually, to stay on the safe side, I keep the shutter speed closer to 1000th of a second, and then depending on the situation, I can allow it to maybe fall back down to 500 or even 125th, or sometimes even lower than that.
Great. So here's a question. What is the difference between telephoto and zoom lenses?
Okay, great question. There are prime telephoto lens is one that is of a fixed focal length, say a 300 millimeter or a 400, 500 millimeter lens, that is at a fixed focal length. When you look through it, you see a fixed magnification. You can't zoom in or zoom out. So the only way to zoom in or zoom out is to actually move in closer or move back further. A zoom lens, on the other hand, is a lens that allows you to move between focal lengths. So, at the lower end, it might be a 70 or a 80 or a 100 or a 200, and at the long end, it could be a 300 or a 400 or a 500. Now, the advantage with the fixed focal length prime lenses is that, they're specialists, and they have much superior image quality, much superior sharpness, phenomenal optics, and much wider apertures available for use compared to zoom lenses. Zoom lenses are a compromise, because they're trying to do many things at once, but you have some very, very high quality zoom lenses that can match up to a lot of prime lenses.
Great. So on the trips, do you go over settings and make recommendations on the fly while you can still produce images like the one you've shown today?
Oh, absolutely. We do that all the time, especially on our photo departures, and of course the Photo Pro expeditions, which are specialist expeditions targeted towards photographers. We do a lot of tutorials and just general sharing tips and sharing ideas and going over settings and going over the images that we have made that day and things like that.
Great. So we can learn a lot by traveling. That's wonderful to know too. So what advice can you give us to help provide a sharper focus on an animal that is behind vegetation? Is there any other advice you can give us?
Great question. Cameras these days have a lot of autofocus points. You see, and using a little joystick or arrow keys on your camera body, behind the back of your camera body, you can move these focus points around. So while you're looking through, dense vegetation at very little of an animal that is visible, say maybe the face or just an eye, try and put a focus point exactly at that spot on your screen and try autofocusing. If it doesn't work, if the camera is hunting, the lens is hunting, give it a hand. Manually focus till it's almost in focus. It doesn't have to be exactly in focus. Manually focus till it's almost in focus, and then hit the autofocus button again, and your camera should be able to lock focus. If it isn't being able to lock focus, lenses these days and bodies these days are equipped with really good autofocus, and these are issues that we used to face in the past. But if it does not manage to lock focus, you have to just do it manually, just focus manually and get the shot.
Great, great. So you provided a daily checklist and a bunch of other information at the top of the webinar. Is there any way I can have access to that information? I know some of us weren't really quick enough to write all that down.
Well, I could go back to them, and then you can note them down. And of course, this webinar is going to be uploaded. A recording of this webinar is going to be uploaded soon. So you can always revisit the webinar and pause the video, and then sort of take screenshots or make your notes.
That is
I'll
great.
Wait for a few seconds so that people can take pictures or just make notes.
Absolutely. And this webinar will be up this evening by 7 o'clock, so you absolutely will be able to take some pictures and some screenshots. Well, we'll leave that up while we finish up today. I'm afraid that's all the time that we have for questions, but I'd like to throw it back to you, Aditya, for any final comments that you might have today.
I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in and for all the amazing questions. And please do make any suggestions that you might have, and do let us know if you'd like any particular subjects that you would want me to present future webinars on. And do remember to check out the India trips for 2022.
Thank you so much, Aditya. And we will be forwarding your suggestions, and we do have some, and we'll make sure that you get them so you can prepare some more fascinating webinars for us. Well, that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank everyone who tuned in. Join us next week for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out next week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.